Keep smiling.
Well, yeah, you better change your.
Good afternoon, and
what do you
welcome
call
to the
it?
Voice of
What do
Wisdom.
you call it when
With
you?
over 60 years of experience as an investment banker, entrepreneur, investment analyst, economist, and venture capitalist, Morty Davis is Wall Street and capitalism personified. The over 400 companies for which he has raised more than $3 billion over the years have created a countless number of jobs and exciting new products. Through the Voice of Wisdom, Mr. Davis explores, analyzes, and debates the most topical political, economic, and social issues facing our world today. Joining Mr. Davis today is two guests. Paul Kopperl, an Army veteran and brilliant Harvard Business School graduate with a highly successful career in investment banking, private equity, and portfolio management. He was an adjunct professor at Pace University and a guest lecturer and facility colloquia leader at West Point. Also today is Len Carter, an experienced investment banker, business consultant, and private investor. And now, Mr. Davis, Mr. Copperell, and Mr. Carter.
Welcome back. It's Wednesday, 6:30. I'm delighted to be back with my precious listeners, the podcast sharers, and I want to thank you again because you offer me so much wisdom and insights. And even when you disagree with me, I appreciate your input because I learned so much from you. As I said before, they say the teacher, a professor, learns more from his students than from anything else. So I learned more from you, my guests, and I want to thank you and appreciate your input and your listenership. And I look forward to hearing from you, even if you disagree with me, or especially if you disagree with me. I'd like to hear from you. And today I'm delighted to have two really genius young, well, not necessarily so young. One is a little older, one is very young, the Harvard Business School graduates. So you have the benefit of three Harvard Business School graduates to talk to or to listen to, and I'm hopeful that you enjoy the program today because we're taking up some interesting topical issues, some of which you may find that you're in agreement with our views. Others you may find that you disagree strongly, but whatever. I think you'll enjoy the input of my terrific guests. So without further ado, we're going to start talking about the Supreme Court and why it's lost its reputation. It's got a lower reputation than even, and it used to be way above everybody else because it was so elite and so special and so respected. Now it has a lower appreciation than used car sales even. So, and they have the lowest, but historically they've had the lowest. So I want to bring up particularly Clarence Thomas and Alito, two of the right-wing members of the Supreme Court, and very partial, very partisan views. And what's most disturbing is that every branch of our government, thankfully, has ethics rules that the members of Congress, even the president, and every employee down to the civil service employees of the government have to live by, or they can get into serious trouble, including if they have fraudulent or some behavior that's subject to punishment by service in prison, they have to adhere to. The only one that's been above it is the Supreme Court. Every other level of the justice system, every judge is susceptible to that. So recently, we've learned that Clarence Thomas has enjoyed millions and millions of dollars of benefits from very wealthy individuals. And the thing that's really annoying is these are individuals that have issues that come up before the Supreme Court. And normally any other judge, all the way down to the local judge in your community or the appeals judge or right up to the Supreme Court, has to recuse himself if they have some relationship with the in the Supreme Court, it's something called the plaintiff with the person who's involved in the issue before the judge. So Thomas has been taking these trips. The last one they said was worth over $1 million. He went out on a yacht. He was flown to the yacht in a private plane and a private jet. So it's turned out to be really remarkable because all the way up to 2004, Clarence Thomas used to report all his special treatment. So the public at least was aware of it. He still never recused himself. But at least we were aware of what he was subjected to. And after 2004, for some reason, I suspect the reason is that because Scalia, one of the most respected judges on the Supreme Court at the time, said he goes on hunting trips with wealthy people that are wealthy members of our society, very successful, and he doesn't report it. So Thomas said, well, if Scalia doesn't report it, then why are you reporting it? So since then, since 2004, he hasn't reported any of that. Millions and millions of dollars worth of benefits, of really valuable gifts. As a matter of fact, one donor who has issues before the Supreme Court, I think his name was Cohen, I forget his name. But anyway, he's a very renowned, wealthy guy, and he bought a house from Clarence Thomas, and also after he bought the house, he gave Thomas's mother free rent at the house. So clearly, he's in violation of the ethics. And to bring you right up to the moment, the Senate, the United States Senate, has now brought up a bill to require ethics, the Supreme Court justices to live up to the ethics of as they will define them. So I don't want to dominate this discussion because my two guests are really brilliant, and I think you should get the benefit, enjoy the benefit of their wisdom. So why don't we start with Len Carter, and then we'll follow up with Paul Kopperl. Len, what do you say about this issue?
I agree that it's a disclosure issue. I think just because whether or not they're violating ethics is a different story. Just because Thomas went on a trip doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be biased toward the person giving him the gift,
even though it's worth $1 million a trip.
I mean, that's why it's and it's not that he can't do that, right? I mean, the issue that people are up in arms over is that he didn't disclose it. It's not they might not be happy, but it's not.
And also that he didn't recuse himself.
Right. So, but that's the question of recusal is really the question, is when, is what are the guidelines, boundaries for recusal? And should they be laid out? Because that's one of the things that the Congress is discussing, is actually setting forth, which I think they should do, right? Because what is a potential conflict? I don't know, but it's always going to be a gray, difficult area to decide. But right now, there's nothing. There's
No,
not.
but at every level
That's what I'm saying.
of
But there's none at the
court
Supreme Court
system,
level.
but at every level of the court system, if they don't choose to recuse themselves, people can bring that issue and force them to
But
recuse
there's
themselves.
and there's also guidelines for what rises to the level of requiring.
Well, $1 million trip
That probably
definitely
does.
not probably undoubtedly.
But that's, I think the biggest problem is that there's no
There's no law, no
defined
rules. Yeah.
metrics, and even though you may not follow them, or certainly having none is not a good idea. And so for sure, we need to have some guidelines set forth, and as best they can be as clear and as defined as possible. But and there's still, the Supreme Court is the justices have a lifetime term. The idea was that they would be above politics and wouldn't have to pander to constituencies.
Well, they wouldn't have to worry about getting impeached or thrown out
Right.
just
or,
because they
or biased by anybody.
right, just because they made a decision that somebody doesn't
Right.
agree with or is very angry about.
But there's still, I mean, for as flawed as that is, there still is a check and balance, right? I mean, justices can be impeached. So it's not like they are,
But
just like a president can be
But not
impeached.
for violations that every other judge, from the lowest to the highest, can be impeached.
Well, but I think
They're not susceptible and they haven't been brought up ever.
that's the key. But there's nothing, just like impeachment, what defines impeachment to a president? High crimes, misdemeanors,
Yeah.
right? Who decides that? Well, the Congress that brings the impeachment decides it.
Right.
In this case, if the Congress decides this, this behavior is bad, and that's impeachable behavior, they could impeach a justice. They'd have to be tried by the Senate. Probably nothing would happen, just like the last two
They
impeachments.
can't impeach anybody if there's no rules.
No, but the
If
rules.
you're not breaking the rules.
No, but they decide what the rules are, just like they
That's what
decide
they're-
what the president, what
That's-
defines impeachment.
That's what they're trying to do now, but right now, they can't impeach them for this behavior because there's no rules that say they can't take the $1 million and still appear as a member of the court to make the decision.
So when
It's
could
not
they
only,
impeach us?
it's not only in their direct involvement, because remember, these guys often are very strongly partisan, like they're very Christian, so they're totally against abortion. And they have a very strong interest in that, Clarence Thomas particularly. So every issue almost that comes up affects them, and they have very strong influence, just like Congress. The donors call the shots.
Right.
It's not the American, all Americans overwhelmingly, not universal, not 100%, but like 70% of Americans are for some form of gun control. But the people who call the shots are the people that give the largest donations, the donors, and so the NRA, which is so focused on that one issue, that's their number one issue. So every congressman, even if a Democrat decides that he wants to vote for gun control, is very reluctant to do it because the NRA says, if you vote for gun control, we're going to put up an opponent against you, we're going to fund them with tons of money, and we're going to primary you, and you probably won't get reelected.
Right.
So that's taken away the one thing that they care most about.
So I want to talk about what we can do about it, but just let's see what his thought on the ethics of the Supreme Court is first, and then we'll talk about how we can change the court, or change the way things are done so that some of this doesn't continue.
Paul, you want to give us the benefit of your
Yeah,
word?
sure, absolutely. I think the court is polarized, just like our government, just like our nation. So it's representative. And the unfortunate part of this is that we, as Americans, are unwilling to face up to public scrutiny and deal with questions of favoritism, lack of impartiality. I mean, when he was vice president, when Biden flies to China and he just conveniently gives his son, Hunter, I guess his son is called, a ride. And so when the vice president gets off the plane in Beijing or Shanghai, his son gets off, and everybody who's in a position to do favors for Hunter Biden know who he is and why he's there, and so on. And the then vice president doesn't say before the trip, "Oh, I can't take my son away. That's improper." You know, that gives the wrong kind of marker. I have to go to China to argue the government's business, and I don't want that responsibility fouled up by taking my son along. So I'm not surprised that Clarence Thomas and Scalia or Aliato feel, well, you know, why should I disclose that I went hunting with so-and-so and I went fishing and we had a great time and we're friends, you know, friends do nice things for friends. Well, the fact is, I'm an emeritus trustee of one of the major hospitals in Boston. I no longer have any vote. I no longer serve on any committees. Frankly, I don't go to very many trustee board meetings either. But I still have to fill out a 27-question questionnaire about my relationship with the hospital and with vendors, with competitors, stock ownership of any companies that might be influence or influence themselves, decisions made by the trustees and the management of this hospital, which is the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. So, you know, the hospital asks this of every single trustee, whether you're emeritus or you're active, whether you're on the executive committee, which I used to be, well, or you're the president or chairman or whatever. And the point is, not only are the facts important, but also the impression that other people get that maybe the business is not impartial, the decisions are not impartial. Maybe that there's some kind of falsehoods, there's some kind of briberies or anything that could influence decisions that need to be considered. So why doesn't the Supreme Court have to get to abide by those kind of standards? What about the vice president? What about the president? What about the members of the Senate, the Congress? You know, we just say, oh, well, that's really too onerous. Well, bullshit, it's not too onerous. You can do it. You can spend half an hour, or you can say no to the guy who wants to fly you in his private plane up to Alaska so you can go fishing.
That's the price you pay to be.
Yeah, sure. It's great to be a Supreme Court justice.
Not fish. You may have to give up fishing.
No, he can go fishing in his backyard, you know, in a bird bath. I mean, there's any number of things. I don't know what the Supreme Court justices have paid, but you know, you can borrow some money and go fishing.
Right.
Now, I mean, not only do we have the polarized nation and polarized government and the polarized court, at least Supreme Court. But we have what I think Lynn Cheney said that absolutely put the point in focus, and that is that we Americans seem to elect idiots for these important public positions. And I mean, I don't think you can say that a Supreme Court justice is an idiot, but in certain areas or certain instances, they don't act responsibly. And so let's have them fill out the detailed questionnaire. That's my point of view. And I think we should require that of everybody in the government.
Paul, that's the issue you just discussed with relation to your obligations to the hospital and filling out a requirement that you fill out a 27 questionnaire document every so often.
Yeah, it's every year.
Every year. So, look, hospitals are very important. Dana-Farber is one of the major institutes, but still, none of them come as close to being as important in the lives of Americans as the Supreme Court, and yet we don't require any. They do file, but they file whatever they choose to file, and there's no requirement. So it shows you how distorted it is. The most important decision making that affects every American's life.
Okay, so I think that's
for sure.
Yeah, I think we agree that a more established, robust disclosure process is beneficial. But so the next question required essential, but that would help on the conflict side. But what about how do we deal with the fact that this court doesn't reflect what most of the country views? In this case, we have a 6-3 very conservative court take the issue of abortion or gun control. As you said, if you poll the country, it wouldn't be 6-3 is 2/3, 1/3. It's certainly not a reflection of the population. So what do you do? How do you change either the way that we select, I don't want to use the word elect because they're not elected, but select Supreme Court justices so that maybe that is a better reflection? Do you limit their terms so it's no longer life term? Do you add more justices so that instead of having 6-3, maybe it's some other 13 whatever? Or do you have the justices elected directly by the public, like we do our congressmen? Why does the president get to pick the justices and not the people?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, what would you do?
Perhaps
if you were king, what would you do?
I would make sure that it was impartial, and to this extent, I would say that alternatively, each justice is we fortunately, unlike England or France or these countries that have multiple parties, we have two parties that are always serving so far. So if the last justice of the Supreme Court was chosen by the Democrats, then the Republicans choose the next one. And if the last one was chosen by the Republicans, so that there's no political influence as there is now.
What happens if you just have a Republican president? They keep winning. Suppose you don't.
I'm saying, regardless of who's in power, that it's alternate.
So who would, if it's a Republican president, but it's the Democrats' turn,
Then the
who
Democrats,
picks? Who?
What do you mean who?
How do when you say the Democrats, what do you mean?
that
See, if you
whoever's this, that what do
like
you
the
call
head
it?
of
The
the caucus, the head of the Democratic caucus, not
the
necessarily the
the
speaker.
senatorial caucus, or you define who represents mostly
So
the
not the people,
well
indirectly
the
through the
people
people,
are these are elected officials.
but the elected officials get to elect,
Yeah,
as opposed to some more of a general election kind of thing.
we have enough general elections. We can't
Right. I mean,
overwhelm.
that would
And
pretty much
also,
serve
most
so long
people,
as it's not the Senate, because sometimes the Senate can be out of line because small states have two senators and
yeah,
big states also have two senators. But if it was more reflective of population, then you wouldn't have a bias toward any one minority
Well,
group.
you're going back to
to
1937 when
when
Roosevelt
Roosevelt
was
was
accused
accused
politically
politically
of
of
trying to pack the court, meaning the Supreme
Supreme
Court,
Court.
and even a man
Man
who was as popular in voting and otherwise as Franklin Roosevelt didn't
didn't
succeed.
succeed.
There's a lot of
A
inertia
lot of inertia
in
in
the
the
in the citizenry, and you would get into a brawl, believe me, if you try to change how Supreme Court justices
Well,
In
Roosevelt
appellate court
In
judges.
Roosevelt's case, though, he wanted to expand the size of the court, and you changed nothing else, which would give him the right to appoint the newly expanded court. What what I think what we were saying before is
there's
you
some,
could keep
but
the court even
there's
nine.
some basis to that, because that would move more towards what the British and these other countries have, because whatever party gets in points to the president. It's not a direct vote to the president. And then that party, anything that they bring up, it's passed. It's not a question of we got to start uh, checking with the members of Congress, so or the different with the Senate, with the House. So the presumption is that we've elected a guy to run the country, an individual to run the country, and his views presumably should reflect the wishes of the electorate that voted him in. Uh, I
At
mean,
least a judgment of what's feasible politically.
yeah, in my view, I'm a strong advocate for having all of the a replay of all of our forefathers who who established the Constitution brilliantly, but over 200 years ago with no adjustments for the changing reality since they did it. So I'd say I'd like to have a constitutional convention every 50 years where we appoint the top, the most brilliant people, as they did our forefathers, and have them go over the Constitution and modify the. So if they talk about gun control, when our forefathers passed, first of all, they didn't even pass it. They said a well-armed militia. Why they prefaced it with those words when they could have said every human being, every American is entitled to own a gun? That would have been clear, and there wouldn't be this issue. But they clearly prefaced it with that. So you have to ask yourself, what did they intend? But also, at that time, they had muskets that we beat the British with. They shot one bullet at a time. It took about 3 minutes or 5 minutes to reload to shoot again. And now we have assault weapons that were developed just for war and for killing as many of the enemy as fast as you can, so you can kill, shoot maybe 100 bullets, a magazine with 100 bullets within 5 minutes.
No,
the,
quoted at that.
the forefathers never conceived of something like that. So you have to update it. You know, even the Torah and the Jewish religion, and I assume in other religions, maybe the Pope is updated. I know for sure because it used to be that all Catholics, all prayer was in Latin, and most of the members of the church were not aware of, didn't understand Latin, didn't speak Latin, didn't, you know. There was a one president, who was it, a vice president, that he said he went to South America and he was dealing with the Latin countries or something, with the Latin speaking countries. So, for example, in Judaism, the Torah, which is supposed to be just like the Constitution, the last word and unchangeable and so forth, it says an eye for an eye. But the council, the the council called the Sanhedrin, which meets either regularly or on emergency issues, said that we don't have to do that. We could reinterpret it to say the monetary value of an eye for an eye. So we don't do an eye for an eye, which is pretty vicious. So you adapt to the changing times and you adapt to reality and you adapt to maybe the progress of civilization. We don't do any of that. Whatever was written in the Constitution many years ago, and then it's subject to the bias of the Supreme Court. They even say if it's not specifically defined as an obligation of the federal government, then the states can determine that. I mean, I don't know if that was ever the intention, you know. So
Well,
we should.
I'm no Supreme Court scholar, but I do recall that I read somewhere, I think in more than just one place, that over the 200 years and more of the existence of the so-called republic, our republic, the size of the Supreme Court has in fact varied. 9 was established, I don't know, maybe 170 years ago. But during the history of the Supreme Court, it has been as many as maybe 11 and maybe 13. I don't remember, but you know, it's not cast in the Constitution. I don't believe it's not cast in stone. So, or concrete. So maybe there is a historical precedent, which in fact might make adjusting the number of justices a bit more feasible. Otherwise, you know, you get back to Franklin Roosevelt and President Ford, you get back to public inertia. Enough people like it the way it is that nothing's going to change. I mean, one of the things, while I have the speaker's position, one of the major changes that this country could effect is to say that women are to be the arbiters about abortions, and all of the men should just get out of it. Now, the Catholic Church might not like that, but it certainly would reduce the acrimony in the legislative branch of our government and among the population. Let the women deal with it. It's their bodies. They're the ones who give birth to children. Let them decide what is right. And the rest of us, let's go out and have a beer.
Paul, I'm ready to vote for you. I agree with that.
But even if you just, it's not even the women. If you just put it to a popular vote,
Yeah,
it wouldn't have to be just the women. If you included the whole population, it's still going to be.
we did put it to a popular vote because that's the one reason the Supreme Court won the last election for the Democrats by overriding what presumably is one of the bases of the Constitution and the Supreme Court's role, which is a respect for precedent. So Roe Wade was operating for 50 years. It was less troublesome far less troublesome than it is now. And also it shows you how stupid the whole operation of election of Supreme Court justices are, and how idiotic and how wrong when McConnell wouldn't approve bringing up a vote in the Senate for a Supreme Court justice that was proposed by Obama, because Obama was putting a liberal justice up for the appointment. So he said because it's the year of the election, and it still had Obama still had 11 months to go, and he wouldn't bring up a vote, much less, find out if the Senate would approve, because if you don't allow a vote, you can't get approval. So, and then 3 years later, maybe not even 3 years later, when Trump was president, and he wanted to appoint somebody with maybe 2 months to go to service as president. McConnell brought it up and got a strong right wing. I forgot who. I think Gorsuch got appointed. So it shows you how.
The last one. Gorsuch was the one that was Merrick Garland's replacement.
That's the one I'm talking about.
Yeah,
Gorsuch.
Yeah, that was right after. That was Trump's first appointment.
No, but that was the one that he
Obama
had 2 months. That Garland was
Right.
Yeah.
I thought you meant the one right before the 2020 election.
No, that was good.
That was another one,
That
Tony
was-
Barrett. All of a sudden, the
Tony
rules
Barrett,
changed,
yeah.
and now with 2 months before the election, 1 month before the election, we can do it really quick,
Yeah.
because he wanted to do it quick.
So Mort, are you suggesting that in my
That they should declare.
questionnaire,
Paul, I'm suggesting that you should declare your candidacy, because I'll vote for you. I'll even contribute the funds to you.
so what I'm asking is, in the questionnaire that Len suggests, I suggest, and you agree with, that all public governmental officials need to sign, at least federal government officials, about conflicts of interest and things of that nature. You would include in that questionnaire, are you duplicitous, as a question that the senator like McConnell has to ask or answer?
Why?
Well,
That didn't work the last time.
that didn't work because all three of the
Yeah.
recent appointments, when they came up to testify before the Senate, they said, they were asked specifically,
Do you believe in
how would
precedent?
you vote, or do you have any special views about abortion or some other major issue? I forget what. And they said, no, we don't have. Every one of them lied, and the minute they got in, they clearly had a strong views, because they knew if they took that position in front of the Senate, they might have been rejected. So
Yeah, that's right.
they don't hesitate. They don't hesitate to lie. Right.
And they're not fit to be senators or congressmen.
Supreme Court justices. I'm saying it's the Supreme Court justices that testify. We don't have, not also, especially, they become political.
Yeah, they are political. No doubt.
And they're not supposed to be. They're supposed to be impartial judges, as all judges are supposed to be.
Sure, then we want them to be traditionalists, and if it isn't in the Constitution, the wording, the question to be dealt with, then what are they going to do? I mean, that's also one of the issues before the Supreme Court and the country right now.
Well, but that's pretty arbitrary because Scalia said he was always voting for, he was called an originalist. Whatever it says,
Yeah,
that's what he approves. Yeah, but whatever it says
as
to
you
approve.
point out,
But there's many times,
these words
that he's, yeah, there's many times that he's deviated when it served his purpose, you know? And all of the originalists are the same.
They're
They're
all
original.
idiots or crooks.
All right, now that we figured that out,
All right.
do you want to talk about another Supreme Court case issue or a little bit about overseas?
What issue do you want? What issue do you want to talk about?
The
At
other,
the Supreme Court.
the other,
How about student debt? Which question should that be forgiven or not?
so what do you think?
I think it should be.
I agree with Paul. I think we do so many trillions of subsidies for major corporations, for oil companies, for.
But what about for people that that didn't, this was a historical forgiveness plan.
Well,
So what about for people under this plan who didn't go to a accredited school and took out loans that can't get forgiven? What do you do with them?
first of all, before we even get to this issue, I have a fundamental difference with the way we treat education, because almost every advanced nation other than the United States supports free college education, paid for. And if they did that, a few $1 trillion now that they're losing in payments because of it became a private industry, and they promoted the hell out of, we'll get your loans, you just apply. And I had a son of one of my clients. He became a hustler and a high pressure salesman to get high school graduates and others to apply for degrees, for educational loans, to further with the promise that once they complete this course, they'll get jobs and they'll be in much better shape and they'll be able to repay the loans. And it was just an outright hustle because they never, so many of them never even had the capacity to handle the courses, to graduate. And even if they got this piece of paper that was called a degree or a certificate or whatever, demonstrating they completed the course. So it was three of the major companies that offered these courses were put out of business because they were so phony. IT&T was one of them, I remember, but there were a few of them. So I think you start at square one. As to what, the ones that paid and the ones that didn't pay, you don't forego the good for the perfect. If we strap these people, we're hurting our society because they can't spend the money. They're stuck with this burden. They were ripped off, and the government helped rip them off by providing these loans to people that should have never gotten these loans.
What about people that just went to a legitimate school that wasn't accredited, so they didn't get a loan eligible for forgiveness? You could forgive them too, or you could not.
I'm not sure what you're saying.
Because the Biden loan forgiveness plan was to forgive certain loans to students who took out federal loans to go to accredited
And also it was
schools.
limited to people that
Earned a certain
that weren't
income.
wealthy,
Right.
that were
But to
weren't
Right.
were poor.
You
So
had to have gone to an accredited school. Suppose you went to a trade school that wasn't accredited.
no, doesn't matter.
Do you
Trade
get your
school,
loan? But do you get your loan forgiven?
if you went to a trade school and you got a good career going, then you accomplished what the bill what the goal was. It's not a question of
So do you get your loan forgiven? If I took out money to go to a trade school, do I get forgiven the way my neighbor gets forgiven
You could
because that
put, you
person
could
went
put,
to?
you could put rules on so you don't have to forgive it. Those people that got what they received and got good lifetime jobs as a result, maybe you keep them paying. But I don't even mind forgiving all of the loans, just so that people feel there's some equity and get past this issue and start all over and give these people a new chance at succeeding in life. They also, I have to point out, some of the people that have testified said they started out with like a $50,000 obligation, and now it's up to 150, 100, because there's all kind of penalties when they don't meet the time schedule. It's just outrageous. It's again a rip-off of the collection agencies and whatever they're called. You know, it's such an imperfect society. It aggravates you when you look closely at some of these issues. The burden, nobody, no student can declare bankruptcy because they can't pay the bill because it's grown so high that they have no way of ever paying the bill. But that's the only one. You could be the biggest bum and running your business and ruining it, or even have tons of money on your own account, but you have a corporate business that you put into bankruptcy. There's no limitation. The only one they put this burden on are poor students that they can't declare bankruptcy because they can't pay.
Yeah.
It shows you the bias, the misunderstanding, the abuse of those at the lowest end of the economic ladder are most abused.
I see we're almost out of time. Paul, you want to have any closing thoughts or comments? We can invite you back for some more.
But if the debt burden is insurmountable, it doesn't. And the guy down may have spent 10 years paying down debt, and it's still handicapping that person from having the kind of life that he or she desires. And I think that's not. I think it's unacceptable in this day and age. So, I mean, the government spends money on everything under the sun, including wars and so on. And we really need to take care of our young people. So I'm against maintaining student debt. I'd forgive it. I don't know what the mechanics are of fixing the problem, but it's a problem. You know, it's right up there with the immigration problems, with abortion, with Ukraine.
It looks like we'll have two more topics.
Whatever you want.
Yeah, why are students the only ones that can declare bankruptcy? Everybody else, it doesn't matter what. They could be at the margin of being, kosher, complying with all the laws, and they still can declare bankruptcy. So
Yeah.
it shows you how biased it
When
is.
I graduated from college, the first thing I did was to join the Army. We had a draft. So, I mean, if I'd been 5 or 6 years older, I would have joined the Army before the Second World War was finished. I mean, it's the break of the time. I don't think you can argue with that.
All right.
I want to thank my brilliant guests for the contribution they made to the exciting discussion we had today. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Len.
Thank you.
And come back again soon. I'm sure our audience must have appreciated your wisdom, hopefully some of my wisdom as well. Thank you. Have a great week. God bless you. And I hope every day of your life was better than the day before. Bye. I love you.
Morty, are you an admiral? Are you in the Navy?